Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we'll be covering some unnerving Reddit no-sleep stories. If you guys enjoyed the video, of course, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe. But with that all said and done, let's get on to the first story. Our first story comes to us from Reddit user Hopeless Foolishness, and the post is called "My Neighbors Are Acting Suspicious and Their Children Aren't Aging." I was 4 years old when the Ambrosio family moved in next door. There was the mother, Valentina, the father, Paul, their 8-year-old daughter, Ray, and their 5-year-old son, Billy. Valentina was tall, slender, golden blonde, and sociable, all sweetness and light and small talk. Paul was dark hair, burly, taciturn, always telling his wife like a shadow. Billy was scrawny, clumsy, often sick, and prone to saying the weirdest things. But it was Ray that caught my attention, even skinnier and sicker than her brother. She inherited her father's quiet nature, always vanishing into the background so she could read. And that was on the days when she was healthy enough to get out of bed. Like her mother, she was golden blonde and blue-eyed. Unlike her mother, Ray's left eye had a distinctive flaw, a singular metallic gold spot just below the pupil. As far as I can remember, my parents liked the Ambrosios, and I had something of a crush on Ray, but looking back, we didn't know much about them at all. They moved away just before I turned 5. I didn't think there was anything strange about it. It was a tumultuous time in our neighborhood, with people renting houses and moving out just as quickly once the rent got too high. When I was 10, my parents decided to move as well. Unfortunately, just as I was getting excited about the idea, bankruptcy hit us hard. It seemed like every time we were getting ready to start packing, there was another form to fill in, and so my parents were left trapped indoors with their paperwork while I roamed the neighborhood, all of us bored out of our skulls. And then, a week later after we should have left, the Ambrosios moved back in next door. Ray and Billy were the first to arrive that day, clambering out of their cars and marching up the driveways as if they never left. And immediately, I knew something was wrong. Neither of them have aged. Rayo was still 8, Billy was still 5. It had been years since I last seen them, but even I could remember that they'd been bigger than me at that time. Now I'd somehow outgrown them. And no sooner had I recovered from the shock, Valentina stepped out of the driver's seat, every bit as vital as she had been 5 years ago, without lines on her face or even the slightest trace of gray in her hair. Then she saw me peering over the fence. Instantly, her smiling face dropped into a stunned gape. Then her mouth twisted into a scowl, and she looked at me with such venom in her pale blue eyes that I instinctively ducked out of sight, suddenly convinced beyond all rationality that she'd hurt me. When I finally worked up the nerve to peek out again, she'd gone indoors, taking Paul and Billy with her. Ray was still standing there, eyes wide with an emotion I'd never seen from her: hope. Then Valentina stormed out into the driveway, grabbed Ray by the arm, and dragged her indoors, hissing furiously at her as they vanished into the depths of the house. A moment later, I heard the faint but unmistakable sound of Ray screaming in pain. I didn't tell my parents what I'd seen. I wanted to, but something about that look of bilious hatred in Valentina's eyes filled me with such dread that I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. By the time I went indoors, I'd given myself a million different excuses to avoid telling them about it, even briefly convincing myself that the two kids weren't Ray and Billy at all, but their cousins. Any excuse would do it if it meant I wouldn't have to face Valentina again. But I couldn't forget or ignore the way she grabbed Ray, or the screams I'd heard after she'd been hauled indoors. So, despite my fear, I kept an eye on the Ambrios house, trying to find a moment where I could talk to one of the kids without their parents noticing, or Valentina appearing at the door to offer me a cup of cocoa. One day, Valentina took Paul and Billy on a shopping trip, so I took the opportunity to sneak over, hoping to speak with the only member of the family left behind. In the end, I didn't get anywhere until I crept around the side of the house and found Ray waiting for me at the back door. Immediately, I saw the gold flaw in her left eye, and any remaining doubts melted away. This was a real Rhea Ambrios in the flesh, somehow still 8 years old. More unusually, her eyes were unfocused, the pupils wildly dilated. Her hands were trembling as she opened the door for me, and her forehead was glistening with sweat. At the time, I thought she was just sick, but now I know she had been sedated to keep her under control. It must have been taking every atom of her strength just to stay on her feet. And as she let me in, I saw that her right hand had been heavily bandaged, completely obscuring her fingers. No sooner when I was indoors, she lost her balance, falling hard on her left leg and leaving a huge bloody scrape across her knee. But just as I was helping her up and looking around for a band-aid, I saw the entire wound sealed shut, leaving behind nothing but bare skin and a faint blood stain on her shorts. Once I'd recovered from the shock, I naturally wanted to ask questions, but before I could even start, Ray put her hand over my mouth and hissed, "Shh." She then drew a notepad and a pencil from her pocket, and on the top page, clumsily scrawled out, "Can't tell you, the house is bugged, she's listening." She paused, hope dawning in her unfocused eyes, and then she wrote, "Easier to show you." I let her lead me into the study, where a large box of photo albums sat, ready to be unpacked and locked in a filing cabinet. Selecting from the topmost album, Ray opened it for me. Inside was a series of antique photographs, many of them dating back to the late 19th century, and they didn't feature grandparents or great-grandparents, but Valentina Ambrosio herself, just as glamorized as she was in the present. About the only thing different about her were the black robes embroidered with occult symbols that she wore in the oldest photographs. No matter how far back the album went, Valentina never aged. She remained outwardly 30, as vital as ever. The same could not be said for everyone else. Before long, the most common of the photos was of Valentina at funerals, mourning the death of another loved one and looking a little more dispirited with every shot. But her spirits reignited with a series of romantic photographs, climaxing with her wedding to Paul in 1935. Cast the enchantment on him the morning after. Valentina's handwritten caption read, "Now we'll be together forever." And then there was Ray's first baby photo, dated 1937. Paul had even gone to the expense of using color film just to capture the distinct gold flaw in her eye. At this, I looked up at Ray with a questioning look. I wasn't great at math in those days, but even I knew that she should be around 60 at the very least. Ray understood at once and nodded. Billy was born in 1940. Judging by the next few photographs, he and Ray had enjoyed a very happy childhood, trips to the beach, lavish family Christmas parties, tree houses too elaborate to be built by normal parents, Halloween parties with impossibly realistic disguises. Even a few shots of Ray studying a huge leather-bound book captioned, "My Little Sorceress." But photo by photo, Valentina's mood began to change again. As Ray turned 9 and Billy turned 6, their mother's expression soured with discontent, and every smile she wore from then on seemed a little more disappointed as the two grew older. Until, at last, there was a photo of teenage Ray leaving for college, while next to her, a teary-eyed Valentina barely grimaced. The next few pages on the album were snapshots of Ray and Billy's adult successes, sent back home to Valentina, torn up with rage, then hastily taped back together again. This came to an end in 1962 with a beautifully handwritten letter, sealed and preserved in plastic. "Dear Ray," it read, "I've considered your request, and now I realize that I was wrong to speak so harshly to you. You have every right to pursue your own dreams, and I will be more than happy to teach you the secret magics. Even if doing so means you will leave the country to pursue your research, please come home to us. Enjoy one last family dinner, and I will give you everything you need. Your loving mother." The album ended with two photos, likely taken by Paul. The first was a shot of adult Ray, tall, graceful, confident, and dressed to impress. Valentina stood behind her, her hand faintly glowing, her face twisted into a hideous smirk. The second was a shot of Ray, suddenly 8 years old again, her now gigantuan adult clothes draped over her like a tent, her mouth open in a scream of horror. And in the background, Valentina laughed triumphantly. "This family won't be broken," blared the caption. "We'll be together forever now." Billy wasn't given the same formality. He was kidnapped on the way back to his college dorm, according to Ray's notes, then tied to a chair before being enchanted and regressed. And this time around, the entire transformation was captured in no less than 30 snapshots. The next few albums were a chronicle of Valentina forcing her two immortal children to live out their second childhood as she wanted them to. There were Christmas parties, tree houses, books, and trips to the beach, but the joy was gone, as were the friends who'd once been invited. Worst of all were the photos of Billy looking progressively more spaced out, accompanied by the caption of, "Finally found the right drug, now he'll act his age. Pity there's no drugs that can induce docility and preserve the bookish streak, or Rhea would be perfect." But it wasn't until Ray decided to show me the nursery where she and Billy slept that I finally realized just how nightmarish things have gotten for them. Because that was where most of the punishment for being too grown up were enacted. After all, the only reason Ray was able to escape this room and let me into the house was because Paul had drugged her instead of restraining her, not realizing that he'd gotten the dosage wrong. Outwardly, the Ambrosio nursery was just as bright and cheery as you'd expect from the children's room, but the door was clustered with locks and chains. There were handcuffs fastened to the bed frames, plastic sheathing on the mattresses. The top of the tall boy was clustered with pill bottles, glass vitals, and syringes. And hanging from the ceiling was a curious looking nursery mobile, where most mobiles would have had farm animals, fish, birds, or stars. Dangling from the strings of this baby mobile were 5 curious fleshy shapes on fish hooks. I didn't realize what they were until I saw the fingernails. Heart hammering, I looked around at the bandages around Rhea's hand. By the way of a reply, she held up a note that made my blood run cold. Fingers take longer to grow back. Rhea wanted freedom. She explained as much in her notebooks and begged for me to help. She told me she just needed me to sneak into the house after everyone was asleep and copy a few pages of her mother's grimoire, just enough to control her own age and force Valentina into a compromise. Once Ray and Billy were chained down and sedated for the night, Valentina was in the habit of leaving the grimoire out of its safe in the study, especially if she had a few glasses of wine during her nightly research. If Ray left the bathroom window unlocked for me, it'd be easy for me to sneak in, or so she said. In the end, I agreed to help, mostly out of pity, but also because Ray told me my life was in danger. After all, Valentina regularly faked IDs and moved her family so no one would notice their immortality. My parents had screwed that up by delaying their departure from the old neighborhood, leaving me as a witness, and Valentina had left quite a few inconvenient witnesses in shallow graves over the years. In hindsight, I'm glad I never accepted any of the drinks she offered me earlier. So, that night, once my parents had drifted off to sleep, I slipped out of bed, armed myself with a disposable camera, snuck out through the back door, and crept over to the Ambrosio house. The bathroom window had been left unlocked, as promised, and after years of climbing trees and shimmying up walls in my spare time, it didn't take too much effort to scramble over the sill and into the house. I still remember the deathly silence in the hall as I tiptoed to the study, of how the shadows seemed to bend and ooze around me, of how I froze at every pause in the muffled snoring of the master bedroom, of how I tried with all my might not to think exactly how Valentina would kill me if I got caught. Somehow, I made it to the study without being noticed, and sure enough, Valentina's grimoire was there on the desk, exactly as she had left it. As soon as I was sure that no one was awake to hear and the door was shut behind me, I turned on the desk light, leafed through the door until I found the page that Rhea was looking for, and photographed each one with my disposable camera. Once I finished photographing everything Ray had asked for, I flicked off the lights and crept out the house, and right on time too. Paul had gotten enough for a glass of milk, and if I left a moment earlier, he'd see me leaving the study, and because I was there just in time to catch a glimpse of him heading to the kitchen, I could see he was ready in case Ray and Billy ever escaped from the nursery. He was armed with a cattle prod. The next day, I got the photos developed. It cost me most of my pocket money, but I was just glad nobody at the shop asked questions about the content. Then, while Ray and Billy were outside playing and Valentina was distracted indoors, I slid the photo through a hole in the fence for Ray to pocket. It was a momentous occasion because it was the first time in 5 years I'd seen her smile. She even broke her silence long enough to whisper, "I won't forget this, Tom. I owe you more than you could possibly imagine." I don't know how she managed to hide the photographs long enough to learn from them, but I was expecting the results to be impressive. I was thinking that the confrontation between Valentina and Ray would be a magical duel right out of Hollywood, to the point I spent the next few days waiting for a glimpse of the fireworks. But in hindsight, I now know Ray wasn't going to confront her mother about anything. After all, the last time she given Valentina the benefit of the doubt, she de-aged Ray back to childhood while her back was turned. Why risk giving her a chance to strike first? So, I awoke one morning to find the house next door eerily silent. After spending nearly an hour waiting for any signs of activity, I crept over for a closer look. The front door had been left hanging open. The filing cabinets and the safe had been emptied. Valentina's wardrobe had been raided, and the car was gone from the driveway. Of the Ambrosios, there was no sign. After that, my family and I moved out of the neighborhood and I settled in Vermont, and my life returned to normal. Years went by. I did well in high school, went to college, got a job, began winning promotions, and eventually I got a small home of my own at a dirt cheap price. No family though. My encounter with the Ambrosios permanently soured any notions of marrying and having children. And then, last month, I got new neighbors. I saw them that Saturday morning, trundling to a stop in the driveway of the house next door and piling out of their van. A family with no less than 12 impressively diverse children, ranging from the age 14 to 3 months old. Also, for some reason, 5 of them were dressed as pirates, complete with eye patches. The mother and sole parent looked uncannily familiar, tall, dark-haired, confident, perhaps 30 years old, and heavily pregnant. Just looking at her reminded me of photos from the 1960s for a reason I couldn't quite explain. But it wasn't until she walked up to say hello that I saw the instinctive gold blemish on her left eye and finally realized why she seemed so familiar. Ray winked at me. "I told you I owed you more than you could possibly imagine," she whispered. Then she walked off to shepherd her children indoor, pausing only to beckon me to follow. And so I did, watching in awestruck silence as my old childhood crush went on about settling her family into their new house with the kind of speed that only magic can manage. She learned a lot in the years since I'd last seen her, I realized, as the house's internal dimension warped and expanded around us. But shocked as I was, it didn't take me too long to get suspicious about Ray's children. After all, the way they jumped to attention whenever they spoke and flinched whenever she raised her voice was concerning enough, as was the curiously mesmerized look to their adoring gaze whenever they huddled around her. And when I saw the eldest child was a dead ringer for Billy Ambrosio at 14, I knew there could only be one explanation. "You said you wanted to be free," I sighed. "I did," she admitted. "But in my free time, I had to keep mom and dad under control, help Billy recover, and try to make a life for myself. It was easier to keep them young and weak, and after a few years of failing to make it in the legitimate world, I realized that I'd missed out on too many opportunities, too much history I could have thrived in." Ray offered a sad little smile. In the end, I realized that after everything I'd been through at mother's hands, what I wanted more than anything else in this world was power. To take back what I lost with interest. Magic gave me power, true, but being a parent gave me so much more than that. There's no drug in the world as pure and rapturous as the fear and love of a children for their mother. She giggled, actually giggled. Now I know why so many cult leaders have their followers call them father. I swallowed hard. "But where did all these children come from?" I asked, nervously. "Who were they?" "Oh, drunks, addicts, petty criminals, nobody who'll be missed. Well, maybe 1 or 2 cops who came to investigate the disappearances, and maybe one nosy little imp from Child Protective Services. But it doesn't matter. I'm a better sorceress than mother ever was, and for someone of my talent, laws and violence are of no concern. Besides," she added, "it's not like if anyone can kill me, is it? And you're just going to keep adding to the family? You're just going to keep making random people immortal and de-aging them into children just for the sake of feeling powerful and loved? Why not? With my powers, I can feed, house, clothe, and entertain hundreds of them without paying a cent, maybe even thousands. And if I don't, well, they can't die either, so..." That impish giggle again. Ray paused and glanced at one of the younger children. "Paul," she called, pushing a cooler towards him. could you put this up in the nursery?" The kid who had once been Ray's father took the cooler with some difficulty. Like quite a few of the kids, he was dressed as a pirate, and something behind his eye patch seemed to be hurting him. He kept scratching and worrying about it. It wasn't until he shuffled into the nursery and opened the cooler that I realized why. Inside wasn't a baby mobile, but thankfully, this one didn't have fingers hanging from it. Unfortunately, it was looking back at me. 5 newly extracted eyeballs hung from the mobile by the octave nerves, taken from 5 kids now dressed as pirates. I was at my limit by then and ready to make a run for it, but there was one other mystery that needed clearing up. "Where's Valentina?" I asked, almost dreading the answer. "That's the beauty of magic," Ray mused airily. "Once the subject's immortal, I can control their age in any way I please. Where is she?" Ray didn't answer. She just smirked and gently stroked her swollen belly, delighted in the faint kicks from within. And that was my cue to leave. I had heard enough, and frankly, I didn't want to hear Ray's explanation. I didn't even want to imagine it, if only because my first visit to the Ambrosio house had left me with more than enough nightmares already. Paul reached out for me as I left, clutching pathetically at my jacket. Once upon a time, he'd been a hulking giant of a man, the terror of Ray, Billy, and even me. Now he was 6 years old and tiny for his age. "Kill me," he whispered. "Kill me." I muttered a half-hearted apology and pulled away, running for the door without looking back. I wouldn't have known how to help him even if I wanted to. I wish my confession could have ended there, but 2 days ago, I was gardening, trying to distract myself from my new neighbor, when I fumbled the pruning shears and accidentally sliced my left arm open. And before my eyes, the wound healed in a matter of seconds. I don't know when Ray cast the spell of immortality on me, but that's the only thing that could explain it. She said she owed me for freeing her. Did she repay her debt by making me immortal and leaving me to my freedom? Or is her idea of reward a place in her family, preserved in eternal childhood, and any minute I'll shrink down to 10 years old? I don't know, and I'm not sticking around to find out. I don't need to worry about outliving relatives, forging IDs, and what I have to do to stay sane, or even if Ray will follow me. I just need to get out of here before the worst transpires. All I leave behind is his confession of the role I played in unleashing a monster on the world, and a warning to avoid her at all costs if you see her. Hopefully, the description will be enough to save you. If not, well, there's always room for another child in the family. Now, that was a super interesting story, a really long read, but it was worth it overall in the end. I think the moment that she casted the spell was when she winked at OP. I think this story really is a metaphor more so about how when a child is abused during childhood, they'll grow up and continue the cycle of abuse. Our next story comes from a deleted user, and the post is called, "I found home videos of my family that shouldn't exist." My brother died when I was 7 years old. He was 13. He drowned in the lake down the street from our house. My parents never touched his room. They tried once, but they couldn't do it. Too raw. After that, the door just stayed shut. His room became a kind of museum of him. That was 11 years ago. His room still looks the same. This morning, while I was packing for college, I thought I'd finally go in there. My plan wasn't anything dramatic. I just wanted to grab a few hoodies, maybe a keepsake or two to take with me. Something to hold on to when I got homesick. Full transparency, I've been in his room plenty of times before. I've sat on his bed. I looked through his shelves, but I've never really gone digging. That felt wrong, and I really had no inclination to. I just missed my brother. That wasn't my intention today either. It wasn't my intention to find a stack of DVDs shoved into the bottom drawer of his dresser. There were 3 of them, just labeled 1, 2, and 3. The only DVD player in the house is still hooked up to his old TV. Everything else went streaming years ago. For a minute, I told myself not to. They weren't mine. They probably didn't matter. I picked up some of the items I've collected, put the DVDs back in the drawer, and returned to my room. Tonight, they started calling to me. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking it's just my curiosity eating at me, but it wasn't like that. It felt physical, a pull in my chest. So, I crept back across the hall, slipped into his room, locked the door behind me so my parents wouldn't hear, and I put in the first DVD. It was a home video. I didn't even know we had any. I don't remember my parents ever owning a camera. The video starts with static, then clears just enough to show something. The picture is muddy, warped. It could be the living room, but the furniture looked wrong. Everything is too big or too small, shifting every time the frame jitters. Sometimes it almost looked like the bedroom, sometimes like a hallway. No faces, no clear shapes, just flickering shadows that didn't match what the voices are saying. There are voices, familiar ones, laughter, clanking dishes, and my mom calling my brother's name. It sounds like family in the background, just out of sight. I hear my brother's laughter, and the sound swallows me whole. It rings through my head, bouncing off the bones that make up my skull. Then, beneath it, is another voice, low, deliberate, close enough that you couldn't miss it. You haven't noticed it yet? Then, the video cuts off, just like that. I scramble to replay it, not even thinking about the other 2 discs still stacked under the TV. I just wanted to hear him laugh again, that laugh. I tried not to think about the end, though the fear of it was crawling slowly up my spine as I hit play. Because the way it spoke, it sounded like it wasn't a part of the recording at all, like it was speaking to the camera, to me. I pressed play again, this time pausing every few seconds, desperate to make sense of what I was seeing, but nothing held still. Everything on the film looked almost familiar, like a room you swear you've been in but can't place. The walls are a little too narrow, and the colors are washed out enough to make it something you've never seen before. It made me feel like my brain was short-circuiting. Then, I froze the frame just before the moment he laughed, and there it was, a caption, faint and yellow, burned in the corner of the screen. July 30th, 2015. 7 months after my brother drowned. My first thought that it was a glitch. It had to be. The camera must have been off by a year. There's no other explanation. I forced myself to breathe and to shove back the rising panic. Then I pressed play again. His laugh filled the room, and for a second, my fear washed away. It was just him again. He was alive, warm, present. A bittersweet rush of comfort and grief. But then the voice returned. Closer this time, wet against the microphone, broken, and cutting in and out like static. You noticed. I ripped the DVD out the player and threw it across the room. I don't even know why I did it. Adrenaline, I guess. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't control myself. I'm trying to think of a logical explanation. I want to believe there's one, but every reason I come up with feels paper thin. I just bolted back to my room and dove under the covers, like that would help. I don't want to watch the other videos. I don't, but I can feel them pulling at me, like they're not finished, like I owe them something. I can't sleep. It's dark. It's late. The rain just started. The bathroom faucet always drips, but tonight it sounded so much louder. You could almost confuse it for footsteps. Oh man, I'm so sad that this is from a deleted user, because I really wanted to go into the profile and see if they made a part 2 to this. I think the voice that's coming from the video is probably his brother trying to reach out to him. And I feel like my theory is especially confirmed with that last sentence. The fact that he can hear the water faucet like dripping and it sounds like footsteps. It could possibly even be like a ghost of his brother just watching over him. I'm gonna try my hardest to find a part 2, but if I don't find it, we are gonna have to go on to our next story. Update: I really tried my hardest to find any sort of update, but it just seems like OP deleted their Reddit account and never actually followed up. Our last story comes from Reddit user 11 Velociraptor, and the post is called "A stranger approached my car at night with a warning. Check the back seat." I like to think I take my personal safety very seriously. I don't stand too close to the road while waiting for the walk sign. I have my location shared with my sister and mom. I keep my wits about me when I'm out in public, and I try not to dawdle about getting into my car. If I had only been more diligent about that last rule, I might not be in the situation I'm in now. Early this morning, just after midnight, I was sitting in my parked car outside of my favorite grocery store. I was exhausted from picking up a friend's evening shift, and so I stopped to grab dinner on my way back from work. The store is in an isolated part of town, but I never felt unsafe in the area. Then again, I never been so late at night. The second I exited the store with my purchase, the old cashier closed up shop for the night and turned off all the lights in the building. For some reason, I did something I never do. I started eating in my car. As a precaution, I try not to linger in isolated parking lots, especially as a younger woman who often has to run errands after dark. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe it was the fact that, due to a recent breakup, my house hasn't felt all that welcoming in the past few weeks. In any case, I was in no rush to return home. I put up an episode of The Terror on my phone and settled in to eat. I enjoyed a few minutes of blissful peace and quiet before a shout pierced through the night. I looked up from my phone and was surprised to find a woman standing in front of my car, waving her arms at me. My car was parked right in front of the store, facing towards the building, and there was only a thin sidewalk separating my vehicle from the store's exterior. I hadn't seen her coming at all. It was like she had emerged from the brick wall before me. She routed my car, coming to a stop beside the driver's side window. She then started pointing at the ground, the universal sign for roll down your window. Fat chance, I thought. Though she looked sane and kempt, I had no clues what her intentions were. In fact, I felt pretty vindicated in always locking my car door immediately after entering. The woman, perhaps seeing I was making no move to exit my vehicle, told me something that no one wants to hear. "Hey," she shouted, "there's someone in your back seat." My mouth went dry. Time seemed to slow as 1,000 horror movie scenes raced through my head. I could almost feel the piano wire digging into my neck, the barrel pressed into my temple. I undid my seatbelt and prepared to launch myself out the car. Now that the intruder knew I was aware of their presence, would I even have enough time to run? With one hand on the door handle, I stole a glimpse into the rearview mirror and saw no one. My car is a compact hatchback, meaning there's very little room for a person to hide in the cabin. Even in my exhausted state, I would have noticed someone upon looking in the mirror, my terror fading to confusion. I turned around in my seat, surveying the cabin with my own eyes and confirming there was no one in my back seat. When I turned back around, the woman had taken another step closer to my car. Her body was barely a foot from my door and her fingers were wrapped around the handle. There were a few more deep clicks as she tried, unsuccessfully, to open the locked door. I raised my gaze and she gave me an odd smile, as though she and I were sharing a private joke. For the first time, using the faint glow of the street lamp, I took a closer look at the woman's face. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skin, making her mouth thin and nostrils appear as though they had been cut onto her. Her eyes were deep-set and ovate, and her teeth seemed both too small and too numerous. I allowed myself a brief moment to gawk at the face before me, and then I threw my car into reverse and hightailed it out the lot. For a few disheartening seconds, the woman held onto my door, keeping a step with my vehicle as I backed up. Luckily, she soon let go, and I drove away, my mind racing with the realization that this woman was trying to bait me out of my car. Even more disturbing was the fact that it had almost worked. I wonder if she had others with her that I simply hadn't seen, and what she wanted from me. I hope I had narrowly escaped the robbery as opposed to something much more sinister. I got back from my house 20 minutes later, still shaken up from my encounter. I rushed inside the house and made sure that all of my doors and windows were locked. My exhaustion did little to soothe my nerves. My mind played tricks on me as I got ready for bed, conjuring up flashes of the woman's face in the dark corner of my house. Once I fell asleep, my fears followed me from the walking world. I had a long, vivid nightmare, most of which I'd even forgotten or is irrelevant to this account. All I know is that when I jolted awake some hours later, it was to the sound of some frantic banging on my front door. I sat up in the bed, unsure if I was still dreaming or not. My alarm clock read 4:17. It was far too early for someone to be knocking on my door unless there was some kind of emergency, which, given the forcefulness of the knocks, there might have been. Slowly, I rose from my bed and inched towards the entryway. I had never been in such a situation and was at somewhat of a loss as to how to react. I didn't smell a fire, thankfully, but that didn't mean all was well. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice calling out my name in a questioning tone. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who is it?" I called back. "Brian," answered the disembodied voice, and relief washed over me. My neighbor, Brian, lived in a house across the street. We weren't close exactly, but I often saw him walking down the block with his dog, Bailey. I turned on the entryway light, but as I was still in my sleepwear, I didn't want to open the door unless I had to. Instead, I called back to him. "What's the matter?" "Well," he began. I heard his voice crack, and he cleared his throat. "Do you have someone over right now?" "What?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" "Well, the dog had to go out, and while I was in the yard with him, I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't look quite right." I stilled, feeling as though I was in some terrible dream. Turning around and glancing down the dark hallway, I wish I had turned on more lights on the way to answering the door. "She followed you home," I thought. "She's in your house with you right now." I was ready to bolt out the door into the cold, but by some miracle, I had just enough presence of mind left to consider my neighbor's words more carefully. Something was wrong. I stepped away from the door. "Are you alright, Brian?" He cleared his throat again, and when he next spoke, his voice sounded slightly different from before, as though he was testing out a new timbre. "Of course, I just got a big cold out here, but I still wanted to check in on you." My voice wavered as I voiced a question to my neighbor. "But your dog, isn't it a girl?" Brian didn't respond. My mind reeled in a torturous silence, trying to discern whether the threat was outside the door or inside the house with me. After a full minute of complete silence, the handle to my front door began to move. It rotated downwards, as far as it could before the lock stopped it, then shook as the person on the other side of my door pulled on the handle. This happened several more times as the person tested my lock, and then there was a powerful bang, as though someone had rammed into my door with all their might. After that, there was silence again. I stood frozen in place for another minute. I had no peephole, but I worked up the nerve to walk into the living room and peer through the blinds into my front yard. In the distance, walking down the street away from my house, was a figure. Although I could not see the face, something deep within me knew it was the same person who tried to open my door. I watched her walk away into the quiet night until she disappeared from my view. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. I split my time between roaming the perimeters of my house, looking for anything suspicious, and sitting in my kitchen running the events of the night over in my mind. The most likely explanation was I had been dreaming. After all, I'd nearly been baited into opening my door to a potential criminal just hours before, so it makes sense that I'd have a nightmare about a similar situation. Then again, I had never, in my entire life, had a dream so vivid. Maybe, somehow the woman really did follow me home. She could have easily stuck a tracker on my car, but how in the world did she know Brian's name? And how did she impersonate him so well? The sun is setting now. I haven't left the house all day. I've been too haunted by the idea of someone, or multiple someones, trying to draw me out into the open. No matter how many times I check the house, I still feel as though I catch a glimpse of the woman in my periphery, of her beady eyes and uncanny smile. I suppose I should try to get some sleep now, impossible as it seems at this point. I just need to jot this down before I went to bed in case A, anything happens to me, and B, you ever think about blindly trusting the warnings of a stranger. This story was really good in the fact that it already takes common paranoia in being somewhere alone in the middle of the night and being followed and stalked. But honestly, there's no way that this story could have ever taken place in America because everybody got guns out here, so I think she could have defended herself pretty easily. But with that all said and done, that's gonna be it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please do not forget to leave a like and subscribe. But with that all said and done, I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye bye.